All right, guys, we got a requested video today. I figured I'd come out here while it's nice and show you what we got going on. This video was requested, so I figured I'd make this, and I think it's going to help a lot of people if you've got these old saws that you know, have that governed carburetor, need to get tuned properly. This video is also going to apply to regular saws as well. I mean, the tuning process is pretty much the same. It's just when you're setting the high side, you have a little bit different sound coming from the saw to look for. It's going to sound more like it's rev limited than it's not necessarily going to four-stroke like your standard saw is. It's going to more like stutter like a rev limiter, like I'm, you know, trying to say. So that's pretty much what you're going to be looking for when you're setting the high side. But I'm going to go ahead and explain the process to you while you can still hear me, because once I fire the saw up, you're not going to be able to hear me. This is my 2100. Y'all seen it in one of my previous videos. It runs fine. It's tuned properly right as of right now. This video is for educational purposes only. I'll go through the steps on how to properly do it, and on this saw in particular, because I got a request for this saw in particular, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set you down, and I'm going to start going through the procedure on how to do this, and we'll go from there. So what I'm going to do to make my life a little easier with this here 2100, I'm going to take the air filter cover off so I can see my jets. You don't have to do this, but I'm just doing it to make it easier, because the saw vibrates a lot while it's running, and this just tends to make it easier for me so I can see. I can actually see what I'm doing. You know, I can peek right in here. Another thing you want to do is make sure that your saw is fully warmed up. If you've got a tune well enough that the saw will run. If you do not have a tune well enough that the saw will run on its own, then you may need to turn the jets all the way in to the right. I use an actual tuning screwdriver. This is a steel screwdriver that I carry in my pocket. It's part number 8902305, and if you look closely, if it'll focus, it has an arrow on the screwdriver that lets you know where your start and stop is. So if you start there and you go to there, that's a half a turn on the jet. If you come on back around to right there, that's a full turn. That's what you call one turn. Okay, so for those that don't know, some of you may already know this, so you know, if you do, that's great, but this is for the ones that don't. Like I say, this has been requested, so I'm going to do this to help y'all out. I know there's several tuning videos out on YouTube, but there's not probably very many on tuning a governed carburetor saw. This saw is still governed. And how the governor works, I'll go ahead and explain that too before we get started. The governor is just a brass jet that's in the side of the carburetor. This is a Tillotson carburetor. Let me go ahead and take this off, and I'll show you what the governor looks like for those that don't know. I'm gonna do this just for y'all's benefit here. So bear with me. The governor on this carburetor is in this side of the carburetor. Here, let me just get you down here where you can see it a little better. The governor is a brass jet or brass screw right there behind the air filter, or behind the fuel line, excuse me. It's right in behind there on the fuel line. You can see it right there. I'm poking at it with the screwdriver. And all that is, guys, is it's a check valve, a ball check valve, the inside the brass jet that goes through the high circuit on the carburetor. And basically all it does is it operates off of vacuum or crankcase pressure from the saw, because it through the impulse system in the carburetor. When the saw is not under a load, it opens that check valve up and allows fuel to flow, more fuel to flow through the high circuit on the carburetor. So when you're revving it up with no load, the saw can't rev. They did that on these big bore saws. This one's 99 cc's. I always call it 100, but it's actually technically 99 cc's. They did that to keep people from over revving these big bore saws at idle, because you've got, you know, big piston, a lot of rotational mass, and that can tend to cause things to fly apart. So they didn't want that. And they also did that to make the saws last longer. But yeah, basically all that check valve does is it allows more fuel to flow through the high circuit. So if you want to get plain with it, it basically just floods the saw out at throttle with no load. So once you put the saw in the log and, you know, you lay it on the dogs, or you got your chain right and it's, you know, cutting, that check valve closes and it allows just fuel to flow properly through the carburetor, and it comes to life, as y'all seen in the video. If you want to know what it looks or sounds like, go back and watch my video of me running this saw, the 2100 wood test, and you'll see this saw come to life. The first couple cuts, I took it easy on it just to get it good and warm, because I don't like to rev my saws until they're warmed up. Another thing you'll see me do is I always hold my finger on the cylinder until I can't no more. So for those of you that kind of wonder why I do that, that's to feel the heat coming into the cylinder. Basically, I know when my cylinder's warm when I can't hold my fingers on there anymore. It's that's pretty straightforward. Keeps it from obviously, if you know, can't hold your fingers on there, it's hot enough to where it's gonna be just fine. But anyway, we're gonna go ahead. I'm gonna slap the air filter back on here. Hopefully that explains to you guys how the governor on the carburetor works. I figured I'd do that since this is a governed carburetor video. But like I say, this tune is gonna apply to regular saws as well. So it's just gonna be a little bit different sound in the end than what you're used to on tuning a regular saw. So without further ado, that's what we're gonna do. I'm just gonna put my air filter back on here. I'm gonna get you set back up. This is just gonna be a raw video, guys, so it's gonna be kind of shaky and it's gonna be kind of loud. So bear with me. I'm gonna fire it up, get it warmed up again because it was kind of cold from sitting. So here we go. This is gonna be really fat on the high side. Okay, so as you've seen, that's really fat on the high side. It's really fat, it's smoky, it's stuttering. That's considered rich, guys. I did this on purpose just so you could see what it's like, what it sounds like. I didn't ever explain, if you have a saw that won't idle, you probably want to turn your jets all the way into the right. All the way into the right, seat them, not over tighten them, just seat them till they stop. And then baseline tune is 1 turn out per jet. So 1 turn on the high, 1 turn on the low. Sometimes you might want to go like 1 1/4 on these big saws because they like a little more fuel. And that's a good baseline tune that the manufacturer recommends on a lot of saws. So if you have a saw that won't crank or you know, won't idle, typically that'll kind of get you there. So, and you can fine tune it from there. We got the saw up to operating temperature, as you've seen. I purposely tuned the high jet nice and fat. So I'm gonna fire the saw back up here and we're gonna properly tune the high jet, and you're gonna hear the sound, you're gonna hear the saw come to life. So here's what we're gonna do. Right there is the blip test, guys. That's what I call the blip test. That's my personal terminology for that. So if it's not proper, you know, I'm not telling you in advance, but that's how I do it. That's how I check my low side jet. To make sure that it's properly tuned, because if you blip the throttle, a lot of times it'll the saw will be kind of fat, and sometimes it'll try to die after you blip the throttle. So if your saw is doing that, if you're hitting the throttle and afterwards it's trying to die, that means it's too rich. So I tweak the low jet just a little bit to set that. That's what you want. You want to be able to blip the throttle and the saw will go back to idle. If your saw has an erratic idle and it's, you know, constantly idling high and you can't get it to idle down, and you've set your jets within parameters, usually 2 turns out, guys, is about the maximum. If you're, you know, 1.5 turns to 2 turns out, you're typically maximum on your jet tune. So if you're out that far, your needle height could be in the carburetor could be set wrong, so you might want to check that. You want your needle height to be set at the base in line with the carburetor. So if you're looking at the base of the carburetor, oh, excuse me guys, knocked you over there. Because I got you propped up on a log with a little tripod here, so bear with me. If you've got, say this is the base of your carburetor on the metering side, you want to look and see the needle. And you want to make sure that it's properly in line with the base of the carburetor. If it's sticking up above the base of the carburetor, it's too high. If it's down below, it's too low, so it's not getting enough fuel. If it's too high, it's getting too much fuel. So that'll allow it to run rich even, and that'll mess with the parameters on your jets when you're tuning the carburetor, guys. It will. It'll mess with the parameters on your carburetor. But as you heard, this saw came to life, and you heard the stutter. It's not going to rev on out like a regular saw will, because it's governed carburetor, so it won't rev but so high until I put it in the log. And like I say, you want to make sure that it's good and warm when you do that rev test. You don't want to hold it there very long. You want to hold it, you know, 5 to 10 seconds and let go and let it breathe, and then 5 to 10 seconds again, and let off, because you don't want to over rev your saw in free rev, because it's not good on them. And if you ever have the top cover off your saws and you're tuning, that's fine and dandy. I know it makes life easier, but keep in mind that saw can get hot and overheat while you got the top cover off, because the flywheel is your fan. It's an air-cooled engine, obviously, so that top cover helps fan air around the fins and the cylinder to allow it to cool itself properly. So keep in mind that you don't want to run it too long and too hard without the top cover on. So so just keep that in mind if you're doing that. Like I say, that's fine and dandy. Just keep that in mind, because you can overheat it. I'm trying to think of everything to cover, guys. So if I miss something, y'all call me out on it and let me know if you need any other advice. But hopefully this will get you in the ballpark on tuning your carbs and tuning these governed carburetors on these old saws. Like I say, once you get your jets properly tuned, you can set your idle to wherever you'd like your idle to be. Typically, idle screw settings, you basically turn it in or out until the chain just stops spinning, and that's usually typically where your idle is if you don't have a tack. It's best to have a tack. If you're not familiar and you don't know what to listen for, it's best to have the tack and go off the manufactured specified RPM range for free revs. This applies to stock saws, guys. When we port saws and everything, the RPM range changes, the power range changes. That's a whole different ball game. We won't get into that just yet, because that's a whole, I could do a whole nother video on just that, on how to tune a ported saw. But this is how to tune regular chainsaws, and it's the basis to how to tune a chainsaw, or any two-stroke engine for that matter. This applies to weed eaters, blowers, everything. But so hopefully that got you in the ballpark for how to tune these saws. So yeah, if you have any more questions on that, guys, feel free to ask me. I hope this helps you and gets you in the ballpark on how to do it. I think Robert Towns, I think he was the one that requested this video. So Robert, if you have any more questions, buddy, just let me know. I hope this helps you out a lot. But you heard it, and you know what it's supposed to sound like now. They don't rev much higher than that, guys. They just don't. That's typically somewhere around 8,000 RPMs free rev, somewhere in that range. Could be a little higher, could be a little lower. It's just a guesstimate and kind of a baseline. But when they are 10,000 RPMs, somewhere in there, somewhere between 8 and 10,000 RPMs, they don't rev super high like the regular saws do. But yeah, this is the basis on tuning, guys. So if you have any more questions, like I say, just let me know. One other thing I want to add, guys, to this video is you also want to make sure that your saw doesn't have an air leak. And that kind of goes along with what I was talking about with the saw here. So I'm going to explain that too, because this saw here actually did have an air leak with it when I was in the process of messing with this particular saw. And I finally found out where it was. You definitely don't want to cook these old saws, because the cylinders for these are hard to find. You can get pistons for them now because somebody's making aftermarket pistons for them, but the cylinders are really hard to find. So check your intake bolts on the saw. So if you've got your carburetor off or whatever, you got access to it, there's 2 screws that go into the intake, so make sure they're good and tight. Make sure your gasket's intact behind the carburetor here on these saws, and that's because that's a prone spot for these things to leak. And that applies to like most all these 2 Series Huskies, and any of them with the phenolic plastic block behind the carburetor, they have a tendency to leak because people over tighten those screws and it deforms that phenolic block back there, and it can cause an air leak, or people try to run them without gaskets or sealers or whatever on there, and it's not the same as a gasket, because a gasket is it's a space filler because the surfaces aren't perfectly true. So, you know, a gasket tends to be roughly around 20 thousandths thick, so that tends to take up any slack or any surface deformities that it may have. So make sure that your gaskets are right, and make sure that they're in place. Make sure that the block is intact and in the right spot, because it has impulse through the block, and if it can't impulse right, then it won't draw enough fuel, or won't draw fuel properly, and it may not run, or may not run right, and it can cause the saw to run lean, which can throw off your tune, because you may be fighting a tune. If you're chasing a tune and you're having to fight it, guys, you have a problem somewhere, and you need to figure out where it is. You've probably got an air leak or something going on inside the carburetor. So this is something that I wanted to add. I knew that I kind of forgot because I was just trying to think of everything, because these videos here can be super long and drug out if you get real in depth with them, like I'm trying to do for you guys. So that's why a lot of people don't want to do these videos, because some people don't know, you know, some people just don't want to take the time to do it, really, because it's just a long process. But I don't mind coming on here and doing this for you guys. But that was just a common issue that I had with this saw, and I've had it with several other these old Huskies, and that can apply to other saws too. You know, saws with intake boots, you might have a tear, or you know, you could have a crank seal leak in, or something of that nature. So like I say, that's all. That can be a whole nother video on its own, just finding air leaks and stuff like that, guys. So that's a little common tip. Like I say, and if you're really not sure about what to listen for, hope this helps. But if you're really not sure, then you probably should get yourself a tack. I recommend the PET -302, I think it is. They can be branded all different kinds. I think Husqvarna's got them, and the actual pet brand makes them and everything. They're pretty good tacks. Just whatever you get you something with a decent refresh rate. You don't want something with a slow refresh rate. Usually like half second or faster than that even is good on tacks. I don't have one myself, but Bellhopper does. But I've been tuning saws for long enough now that I can typically know what to listen for. 4-stroking and stuff on the top end, and on these governed saws, that's typically what to listen for. So yeah, that was something I wanted to add, guys. I know I'm kind of just rambling on right now, so if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching. And you know, if this is not something that you want to listen to, then you don't have to. But obviously, if you're hearing this, you've made it this far. So I hope this helps, guys. But yeah, definitely check for air leaks. You don't want to ruin these top ends on these things. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up, guys. I hope that helps you all, and hopefully it does. So anyway, we're gonna stop this off here, and if you got any questions or just want to comment, then that's great. Just let me know. All right, guys, over and out.